sphere of different things like you can see the halogenated flame retardants and different admixtures and chlorofluorocarbons and different refrigerants. And then we get to the Living Building Challenge, which, who's heard of the Living Building Challenge? Excellent, that's what I figured most of you guys. Okay, so when I was tailoring this presentation, it's hard to get very deep in 50 minutes into something so complex, but I was kind of hoping and assuming, based on past presentations, that you guys had a pretty good grasp on some of the basics of LEED and Living Building Challenge and things like that. So I'll have to explain that a whole lot, but they have their own specific red list, if you will, that they developed. They being the International Living Building Institute, and as new science emerges and they update their system, kind of like USGBC does with LEED, they're always trying to improve their system. And you can see the list here. You have some of the suspects you'd expect: asbestos and formaldehyde and things like that. They also have products like PVC, which it's difficult right now at this point in time in the industry to find viable alternatives to PVC for different building systems. And this is a challenge that we've been faced to try to achieve some of these pilot credits. They also try to give you some tools to help you, and some systems here to help you cut through some of the confusion in the market. And so they have this Declare protocol that they launched about 2 years ago. And they essentially call out at a glance, kind of like what Brandon was talking about with the nutrition label on the box of cereal. You've got this very quick, succinct label, essentially, that's going to tell you at a glance, even with the color code and some boxes checked, if it's compliant with the Living Building Challenge and what ingredients, so to speak, are in there, and if there are some problems, if there is something that's on the chemical of concern, you might need to, it'll be flagged, and you'll have you'll at least have that brought to your attention to dig into a little bit deeper. In addition, as they're going through their own regular cycles of improvements, they have a watch list, which you can see in this diagram covers a different sphere than what their current red list would cover. So on this watch list, they have more alphabet soup. There are European standards that were mentioned earlier this morning, somewhat different than ours, and in some ways very different than ours. The Living Building Challenge taps into some of those European regulations and systems and cites some of those chemicals as well. And then GGHC, that's the Green Guide for Healthcare that I mentioned a while ago. A large focus on indoor environmental quality. This really started off, and if you look at LEED and Green Guide for Healthcare and others, that it was identified that environments for healing, like healthcare facilities, and environments for learning and with children should especially have a focus on reducing exposure to toxins. And so they were one of the leaders in this a decade ago, and even doing things that were really cutting edge at the time, like just the notion of lamps, things like that were unheard of back in, all the way back in 2004. Right? Wasn't too long ago. Things are changing quickly. Then it gets us back to where we started with Google, and they had the Living Building Challenge red list. You can see the sphere that captures. But then they also called out the EPA chemicals of concern, which you also saw some overlap, and you saw cited in the Declare label. So again, I've given you guys enough alphabet soup and keep digging deeper and deeper into this topic, so I decided not to recite all the different acronyms here and go through the red list itself, though I have shared this with Anthony and would be happy to share this with any of you guys if you want to take a closer look at it. These chemicals of concern that the EPA has listed, they have action plans associated with each one to address them over time, try to reduce their usage. And then the last one, getting into LEED, you can see a couple of different layers. You got LEED for new construction, LEED for healthcare, the LEED pilot credits I mentioned before, And it's starting to become harmonized now with version 4, but up until that point you had these different spheres of red lists that different versions of LEED and the pilot credits were taking on in their own regards. So one of the first ones being LEED for Healthcare, they had no formalized red list in the 2009 version of the rating system, but they did cite specifically that you shouldn't have asbestos, of course, but that in mercury, lead, PCBs, mold, things that you would hope wouldn't be in your buildings already, calls it out explicitly, but then went beyond that to call out some other specific materials and cut down certain levels. There were also some pilot credits. This is one of the pilot credits that we looked at for these projects at Earlham. And the first one here, pilot credit 62, I underlined the word disclosure because it's difficult enough to get product manufacturers to share this information. This particular pilot credit was really designed, and now it's streamlined into LEED version 4. You'll see kind of two sides of the coin with some of the building material related credits under the MR category with LEED version 4, but they make the distinction between the disclosure of what's in the products and materials versus optimizing what is the level of perhaps red list materials or something that's got a perceived elevated health risk with regard to it. So just a simple act of trying to find the disclosure, though, like I said, liking it today, the challenge for you and the challenge for your teams is really on par with what we had to go through 8 years ago with earlier versions of LEED, trying to just find these single attribute characteristics, like, well, where is your manufacturing facility, and is that within my 500-mile radius, and what are the VOC levels, and all these things that you can get very quickly now. Now what we're finding with working with manufacturers and trying to call in and pull information is even the simple act of this disclosure. They have to go to some of their subcontractors that provide them with supplies and different processes and trying to get some of this. This particular pilot credit does call out this Clean Production Actions Green Screen version 1.2 benchmark 1. Sounds like a mouthful. Little diagram here, they call it the level of high concern. You've got, it's hard to read on this slide, but you've got different kind of low, medium, and high concern levels for different materials that might be present in the product. So just trying to find any disclosure for some of that hazard criteria was a challenge enough. We were also signed up for the avoidance, which kind of being a precursor again with a pilot credit to the optimization credits or options in LEED version 4 is to try to actually avoid some of these potentially harmful materials that exist in your building products. So they list what some of those are. Third-party certifications required, and that becomes important just for the validity of and the objectiveness of some of the analysis. Cradle to Cradle was mentioned. For years they've had a certification system for building products. It's gained some momentum in the last couple of years. They've improved their system and released a new version of it. They've got 4 levels, basic, silver, gold, and platinum. They're based on 5 criteria that I have listed there. You look at the chemicals in a product down to 100 parts per million level. Things like PVC and chloroprene and other potentially hazardous products and materials are to not be in any of those products certified under the system. They get back to that basic cradle-to-cradle notion that you should try to eliminate the concept of waste, and that everything that we build or install in a building should be able to be separated into either a truly recyclable process within industry, that it's not like paper where it keeps getting a little bit worse and worse, or certain types of plastic where the chemical bonds become degraded over time, that you can actually truly recycle materials, but then also nature has its own way of recycling, so you could similarly look at things that could be truly compostable and become nutrients back into a biological cycle. So with LEED version 4 now, Cradle to Cradle certification is a compliance option for that optimization criteria. So that was how deep the rabbit hole got when we were just working on a couple of projects recently, trying to look at what the values are for some big corporations that we're trying to get on some other projects, and we just see that it's getting a lot deeper, a lot more holistic. But luckily, there are a lot of these tools, and I tried to structure this in a way that there's kind of a narrative going on. If you go back and look at my slides, you can pull out some of these resources like the Pharaoh's tool and the Declare label, things like that. But I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on life cycle, at least a little bit. And I know I've only got a few minutes left, so I'll make it fast. Let me start with, do you guys have a basic grasp of life cycle assessment, what the basic idea is there? That you're looking at a building from, or you're looking at a product, anything that goes into our, whatever material or product we may use, you look at it from a holistic life cycle